Kenya is now reportedly looking for debt service waivers by more lenders after the Paris Club of International Creditors handed it a 32.9 billion loan repayment holiday to help ease the financial distress that has been brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the countries, which include Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea, Spain, and the US, said Monday they had accepted a request from Kenya for debt service suspension from January to the end of June, 6 months. Now, the statement from the club read, and I quote, "Kenya is committed to devote the resources freed by this initiative to increase spending in order to mitigate the health, economic, and social impact of the COVID-19 crisis." Now, the Paris Club said in a statement on its website. Now, the country has also applied for relief under the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative, DSSI. Now, let me remind you, which we refused to take late last year, all right, which is estimated at 40.6 billion from January 1st to June 30th from non-Paris Club creditors. Now, this comes after Kenya bowed to pressure from the International Monetary Fund to include 3.4 trillion parastatal and county loans as part of the country's national debt, which the Treasury Office says plans to gradually include in Kenya's debt portfolio, gradually beginning with foreign currency debts and slowly moving to loans from public and private partnerships. That's where we are, George. And I want to ask you, though, and I mean, let's begin from where we are. What do you read into this fast and quick rush to take debt service waivers from the Treasury Office?
Elijah, I think we discussed for a better part of last year.
Yes.
That government revenues were faltering, and government was not able to collect as much revenue as they had projected in the 2019-2020 budget, and then now 2021 budget. With the COVID-19 pandemic coming into our country by March last year, it came in at the peak where at a time where we should have been collecting as much revenue as we can, but that didn't happen. Two, remember when the president announced the economic stimulus package 1, there was a lot of tax breaks that were given. Remember, we were given tax breaks on pay as you earn, and the president gave out tax breaks on corporate tax, and he gave out tax breaks on value-added tax. And those three are the major contributors in terms of tax collection, revenue collection. So when you give out those tax breaks, then the ripple effect is that at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the year, yes, you expect to have a very depressed revenue, and that is what has happened. So government finds itself in a situation where its debts are rising, and they should have been. I think the 32.9 trillion from the Paris Club was due by January this year, and government doesn't have the revenue to pay up this loan. That necessitated the move by Treasury to go and ask for that debt suspension. It's not a debt waiver per se, but it's a debt suspension, meaning that it will have to be paid at a given time. I think by June of this year. So from where I sit, I think it is a good move, but government or Treasury to relook at its finances, so that come June of this year, at least we have those revenues to pay these debts. The risk that you have when you keep on suspending your debt service is that you are downgraded, meaning your credibility in the League of Nations is downgraded. Therefore, yes, you will find credit at very expensive rates. So, in a nutshell, I think it's a good move. But Treasury needs to start looking at its books properly, so that come June, they don't say that they want to have another 6 month suspension going in 2022.
Yeah, Joe, just before I let you go, there's this big elephant in the room. IMF is asking the Treasury Office to add 3.4 trillion to its debt portfolio, meaning that we could be at 10.4 trillion. Is that what could be behind this rush from Treasury to actually rush into taking debt service waivers?
Elijah, I agree with IMF 100%. There's no way when you're accounting for your debt, you say you only want to account for the debts of the father, and not the debts of the children, so to speak. So
Yes.
if the government is accounting for our total national debt, then they must take into account the debt national government owes, the debts that county governments owe, and the debts that all our parastatals owe, because all these feed into our national debt. So by IMF requesting, or by IMF demanding that the government must declare this additional 3.4 trillion debt that is owed by county governments and by parastatals, I think it is a good move, so that we have a consolidated picture of our total debt portfolio. Remember, our debt ceiling as it is today is 9 trillion. If you add the 3.4 trillion,
Yes.
already we have passed our ceiling. Therefore, Treasury must go back to Parliament and request for a review of that debt ceiling. It is a good move because it gives us a global picture or a global overview of where our debts are, so that we don't underreport our debts and increase 3.4
Yes.
trillion, Elijah.
All right, Gabriel, let me bring you in on this. Maybe now, Gabriel, you could actually paint for us a picture of what it means when Treasury kept on telling us that we don't anticipate to touch 9 trillion shillings up until 2022. Well, IMF is telling them, well, but you're already beyond that. And they kept on saying that from a very long time ago, that you can't just look at guaranteed debt as the only debt that gets into your portfolio. You gotta consider a lot of things. Gotta look at your counties, gotta look at your parastatals, gotta look at your PPEs as well. Now, what does that mean when in reality we're starting with 2021 by being at 10.4 trillion, and it looks as if Treasury has accepted it? And look at the way they're saying. They're saying that they're going to factor this debt gradually into our debt levels. Is that not a confusion per se? Is that you saying that you owe me 1,000 bob, but I'll keep on considering that as time goes by? Why can't we consider it all together? And what does it mean being at 10.4 T right now?
To put it simply, means our goose is cooked. Because for obvious reasons. And I think we finally see what the president was complaining about when he said there was interference from our foreign and the state, etc. I think personally I wondered what exactly it was, but this is clearly it.
Yes.
So one is if you look at most of these parastatals, they keep going back to the government for bailouts.
Yes.
That's one. So essentially, they're unable to pay their own debts. That's one. Two, who has lent to these parastatals? It's the same entities that have lent to government.
Yes.
The World Bank has lent to most parastatals, KPLC, etc. All these international bodies have lent to all these parastatals the same way they've lent to the government. Three, it's concessionary debt. It's not priced at market value. So, it would be cheaper than if they were going to a foreign bank, etc.
Yes.
Because they have government banking. The government literally, in short, Treasury signs on those documents saying, yes, we are this debt fully. If this parastatal goes bust, this is going to fall into our national debt. So literally, it's an obligation you have, because you cannot, as a country, consider the assets that these parastatals have, but fail to consider the liabilities that they have.
Yes.
That's really what they're telling the government of Kenya. Now, what is the implication of this? We already have a debt ceiling that effectively we are saying we are going to surpass. It tells you how desperate the situation is, for us to go for that debt relief, because we actually need to keep the cash flows. We cannot manage to pay all this money for this year.
Yes, and Gabriel, sorry to interrupt, sorry to just intercept you there, but remember, this DSSI is the same one that we had refused late last year, when Yatani came out and said, we shall never default, we can never default, so we don't need to go for it. How do you read into that? Now he's run for it, and he's going for China as well.
Yeah, because you see, that's what I'm saying. This brings a lot of clarity, because we were wondering, who is this who would not go for a debt relief? Even companies that were doing well still went for local banks for debt relief from their local banks.
Yes.
So, that was the confusion. Why is Treasury not going for this? But the reason is very clear, because they actually have to do proper accounting. That's it. for them to get this relief, they were going to do proper accounting, and they didn't want that. It's as simple as that. They didn't want to do proper accounting, and now they find themselves in a situation whereby they have to take the debt relief because we cannot pay those loans in time. We need the money locally. They have launched very fresh projects. We have projects that have stalled. Elections are coming, so we have to look good. We have to look rosy. So it's literally that scenario we're in. But my biggest concern is what happens in June when we are reading, call it next year's budget.
Yes.
We are looking to increase our to meet the expenditure, and we've actually surpassed our debt ceiling. So, what are you going to be telling Parliament? Are you now talking of increasing or saying that in our calculation of 9 trillion, do not count this 3.4 trillion? Or are you saying effectively, if you're going to count this 3.4, our ceiling should be 12.4 trillion? You see, that's the math we're going into. And remember, our GDP is growing at a way slower rate. So we are being hit on double sides if you're looking at debt to GDP. Our tax revenues are being hit. So if you're looking at tax revenue to debt service, we've been hit on two sides. So I go back to how I started in your question. Our goose is cooked.
That's why it is, isn't it? All right, George, let's just see exactly how we've been cooked, therefore. I mean, let's go back to what Mohisa Kitui said. And there's something that you said about our credit rating, that had we taken this debt service waivers back in 2020, then we could have actually just been considered as one of the countries that have a healthy payment system. But Mohisa Kitui told the country, but your credit rating is already worse than where it should be. So you should have run for that when you had the opportunity to. But do you see this as a coercion from bodies like IMF now for Kenya to take that debt relief? Because we do know we have to go back again for money from them.
Elijah, what Treasury didn't do was what we call, when you're doing your planning, especially financial planning,
yes,
you need to have your short-term, what you call your short-term financial plans that covers the next 1 year.
Yes.
And then you have your mid-term financial plans that covers maybe 2 to 3 years. And then long-term plans that covers 5 years and above. With the pandemic, Elijah, I expected Treasury to have forecasted or seen that they were likely not to collect the revenues that they had projected in the 2019-2020 budget and then 2020-21 budget. So in my assessment, I think it is lack of planning. Treasury should have picked up this debt waivers or this debt suspension at the initial stages. In fact, in my opinion, I think this is something that they should have started negotiating immediately the pandemic hit us. That is way back in March, so that we don't have our credit ratings coming down. But as it were now, when you go back to this lender and start asking for them some of these waivers,
yes,
then they must impose their conditionalities, which is natural for any lender. Even if you're a corporate, you go to the bank to request for a debt waiver, then there's some conditions that come with that with that waiver or with that suspension. That is what the country, or that is what Treasury is experiencing now. But all is not lost, Elijah. I think Treasury can still do its books right, can still do its accounts right, and even if it means going back to Parliament, an increase in our debt ceiling, with the fact that now they have to account for the 3.4 trillion owed by parastatals and the county governments, then so be it. They need to do that. I think sometimes it is good to bite the bullet at the right stage than sugarcoating things and waiting for things to burst. This is the time to put their books in order, so that as we go into 2021, we know that our debt portfolio currently is at 10.4 trillion. We need to increase our debt ceiling to 12 trillion. And how do we manage that 12 trillion so that we don't go past that 12 trillion? before the end of this
Yes, but George, let me just cut you there. But is that not what you do not want to do, essentially? Because then, if you say that your debt ceiling is going to be maybe 12 trillion as we start 2021, but what about our GDP ratio to that debt? Is that going to be unsurmountable? Is that not why, in the first place, we said put it at 9 trillion? Because there was a lot of conversation again as well. We would talk about an absolute figure without essentially considering where our GDP ratio is to that figure.
Definitely, that is something that the government do not want to do, Elijah. Of course, it will make the government look bad, because they had the sailing just reviewed the other day. I think it was last year.
Last year,
in the quarter two of last year. So if you are to ask again Parliament to increase the debt ceiling 12 trillion, then you expect some backlash to be on government, and that is not something that they would want to do. But as much as it is that bad, they need to appreciate that is the position that they are in, and then come up with. I think sometimes you need to appreciate where you are, and then come up with strategies on how you are going to manage yourself out of the debt, out of the hole that you are in. We are already in that debt hole, and I think Treasury should just acknowledge that we are already there and seek for strategies on how we are going to move that, albeit with some pain, that we are going to swallow. But that is something that Treasury has to do. That is something that government has to do. They have not to way about it. The earlier we do it, Elijah, the better for our country.
Yes, Jose, I'm going to come back with you on that. Now, Gabriel, Yatani says that he plans to gradually, therefore, add this 3.4T to our debt levels. But how? How is he going to do that? Because, well, that's if you have accepted that you have that, then you'd rather do it right now. What sort of approach is he taking by saying, well, it's going to be a gradual addition to our debt numbers?
It's actually very unclear exactly what he's going to do. I mean, the aspect that he's going to add the foreign debt,
yes,
of course, is to just please the masters, if I can call them that. It's just to satisfy whatever the conditions they have put by adding the foreign debt.
Yes.
Then they'll now start coming, of course, to the local banks, etc. And essentially, what this would mean is that, and I don't know what it means for accounting in the bank's records. Does it mean that banks actually start accounting for, those loans to government as equally to treasury bills and bonds, or rather in the same category, or do they keep them as commercial loans? That's one.
Yes.
Will banks be required to lend cheaper to them? That's a question for a different day. But the key that I'm picking here, and from what George is alluding to, is that Treasury, one, is not willing to do what they need to do. And it's as simple as cut your expenses. If Simba, you do not have money to eat meat, you do not eat meat.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. If you do not have money to do a certain project, you come to the citizens. Yeah, you cannot go around the country promising roads left, right, and center, and you do not have the money for that. You're even unable to negotiate all these paychecks they're negotiating with unions. You do not have the money. It's as simple as that. But because they have their own agendas, likes of BBI, then you cannot say, I'm doing this, but I'm not doing these others, because, then, of course, you do not appease the citizenry. So I think, and this is the hardest thing for any government to do anywhere, including the United States of America, and even bigger nations, to cut your expenses. And that's what we need to do. Recognizing all this debt is accounting magic, unfortunately, which the government has shown us in the past they can play around with. They can delay, they can adjust 2 years down the line. I mean, KPLC adjusted their, as a parastatal, because now we are looking at the fathers and sons as one.
Yeah.
They adjusted their profits 2 years later. When you change audits that far out, you wonder what's happening. So even leave aside the accounting, but what we need to look at is how will the government reduce the expenditure, because that's the only thing they can do.
Yes.
Revenues are kaput. We are tight, our belts are as tight as they can get. So it's only the expenditure that they can take care of. We should be in a state where the government says they cannot serve even visiting president's tea. That's where we need to get. Not serving them parties and cocktails. Just tell them, in this country things are bad. Thank you. You come, you meet us, you go to your hotel. No parties, no nothing. That's what they should be doing, but they're not willing to do it. So as long as when you're doing your news, you still see parties and grand events, etc., big roads, then just know we're still going down that rabbit hole.
Pretty much. All right, George, clear for us this conversation, therefore. Yes, if it's 10.4, it is. Now, we do know it is because actually Treasury is accepted it. If it's 10.4, and you're saying that they should accept and probably raise that ceiling now for, because we gotta borrow for these funds. We gotta have a ceiling that we are not, that we don't have to touch in the meantime. What do you expect to happen now for? Should we raise it to 12T in the near future or in the short term? What should happen so that we don't get there?
I think Elijah Yatani's hands are tied behind his back. Yes. He has no alternative as we speak. The way IMF or the British institutions are accounting for our debt, they already know that our debt is at 10.4. So it doesn't matter what we do within our books or try to cook locally, but the international institutions or the international lenders already know that our debt portfolio at 10.4 trillion. And the offshore commercial lenders are even more keen, Elijah, and they know your position even before you give them your books. So it doesn't matter what you do locally.
Yes.
What is outside there is that we are at 10.4 trillion. I think Treasury needs to bite the bullet now, accept that we are 10.4 trillion. Whatever way they want to account for it, if they want to acknowledge it now or they want to defy it maybe to 1 or 2 years, that is a debate for another day. But that is where we are. Two, they need to go back to Parliament as it is today and try to move the debt ceiling from 9 trillion to 12 trillion. Remember, even the 9 trillion, Elijah, we were almost bust because we were already at around 7.6 trillion. So we were just 1.4 trillion shy of the 9 trillion. So I bet even if you are at 9 trillion, before we read the next year's budget, we would have bust that figure, especially coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. So in my opinion, Elijah, if I was in Treasury, then one, I would acknowledge that we are 10.4 trillion. We'll account for it in A, B, C, and D manner. But that is where we are. If we are to move from point A to point B, then we need to borrow maybe an additional 2 or 3 trillion. Therefore, we need to move our debt ceiling from 9 trillion to 12 trillion. But then you must have a right that now that we have that huge debt portfolio, how are we going to have fiscal policies to be able to not only save the little revenues that we have, so that we can be able to manage to pay our recurrent expenditure, but also pay our debts as they crystallize. I think that's the conversation that now Treasury needs to start having with itself and with its lenders. Elijah.
Very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much for just painting a picture of how Kenya is starting its 2021 on Just a Hard Rock. Gabriel, George, thank you very much for taking your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, and on that note, we come to the end of Business I Am this morning. Good morning.